I'm standing in my kitchen on my 69th birthday, and my hands won't stop shaking. The box of Belgian chocolates sits open on the counter in front of me, looking perfectly innocent with their glossy dark coating and delicate swirls. But the paper I'm holding tells a different story. The words blur as my eyes fill with tears. Arsenic poisoning. Lethal dose detected in all samples tested. Detective Susan Porter is still talking, her voice seeming to come from very far away. Mrs. Green, if you had eaten even 3 of these chocolates, you would have died within hours. Your daughter-in-law saved your life by refusing to let you accept this gift. I can't breathe. The kitchen tilts sideways and the detective grabs my elbow, guiding me to a chair. How did I get here? How did my life become something from a crime show? I need to go back. I need to understand how this happened. 3 weeks ago, everything seemed normal. Well, as normal as things had been for the past 5 years. My birthday was coming up and I was trying not to get my hopes up about hearing from Kenneth. My son. My beautiful boy who I raised from the time he was 6 months old. He'd been distant lately. Actually, distant is too kind a word. He'd been cold. Ever since he married Helen and her mother, Beatrice entered our lives like a hurricane in pearls and designer clothes. Beatrice made it clear from the first family dinner that I wasn't good enough. Not wealthy enough, not educated enough, not sophisticated enough. I was just a nurse who'd worked double shifts for 40 years to give Kenneth every opportunity. Beatrice looked at me like I was something stuck to the bottom of her expensive shoes. And slowly, Kenneth started looking at me the same way, but I made excuses. Marriage changes people. He was busy with his career. Helen needed his attention. I understood. I always understood. That's what mothers do, right? We understand. We sacrifice. We wait patiently for our children to remember we exist. The morning of my birthday, I woke up alone in my little house. The same house I'd kept small and manageable so Kenneth wouldn't be burdened with a large property when I was gone. I checked my phone. No messages, no calls. I told myself it was still early. He'd probably call at lunch. Or maybe after work. Or maybe tomorrow. Maybe he forgot. It happens. But then, around noon, I heard a car in my driveway. My heart jumped the way it always does when Kenneth visits. Like a foolish old woman who can't accept that her son has outgrown her. I rushed to the door, trying not to look too eager, trying not to seem like I'd been waiting by the window. Kenneth stood there with Helen and the children, William and Lucy. My grandchildren, who I barely get to see anymore because Beatrice thinks my neighborhood isn't safe enough, my house isn't clean enough, my influence isn't appropriate enough. But there they were, on my doorstep, and I wanted to cry with happiness. "Happy birthday, Mom," Kenneth said, but something was wrong with his smile. It didn't reach his eyes. He looked nervous, kept glancing at Helen like he was waiting for permission to speak. Helen looked uncomfortable too, shifting her weight from foot to foot, her hands clenched tight around her purse. I invited them in, talking too fast, offering drinks and snacks, desperate to make them stay a little longer. That's when Kenneth pulled out the box. Elegant, wrapped in gold paper with a silk ribbon. Belgian chocolates. The expensive kind I'd never buy for myself in a million years. "From all of us," Kenneth said, pressing the box into my hands, "for everything you've done." I hugged that box to my chest like it was made of gold. Tears spilled down my cheeks because this was it. This was proof that Kenneth still cared, that he still remembered who I was and what I meant to him. The children were tugging at Helen's sleeve, excited about something, but I was too overwhelmed to notice. I moved to open the chocolates right then. I wanted to share them, to make this moment last, to sit with my family and eat candy and pretend everything was fine. But Helen's voice cut through my happiness like a knife. "Actually, Dorothy," she said, and her voice sounded strange, tight and high-pitched. "Mother Beatrice sent these specifically for you. She was very clear that they're your birthday treat alone. She even included a note saying you deserve to indulge yourself for once." Helen's hands were shaking as she pulled William back from reaching for the box. I noticed it then, the trembling, the way her knuckles were white from gripping her son's shoulder too hard. But I didn't understand. I just thought she was being protective the way mothers are. Kenneth jumped in quickly, agreeing with Helen. "Save them for later, Mom. Something special just for you. You always share everything. This time, be selfish. Enjoy them by yourself." The word selfish coming from his mouth stung. "I'm not selfish. I've never been selfish. I worked myself half to death raising him, giving him everything, asking for nothing." But I smiled and nodded because that's what I do. I agree. I accommodate. I make everyone comfortable except myself. They left soon after, making excuses about appointments and traffic. Kenneth kissed my cheek, but it felt mechanical, like he was checking off a box on a list. Helen barely met my eyes. The children waved from the car and then they were gone, and I was alone again with my expensive box of chocolates. That night I couldn't sleep. Something gnawed at me, kept me tossing and turning until my sheets were tangled and damp with sweat. I kept replaying the visit in my mind. Kenneth's nervous energy, Helen's trembling hands, the way they both insisted, almost desperately, that I eat the chocolates alone. And Beatrice. Why would that woman who despised me suddenly send an expensive, thoughtful gift? Beatrice, who'd told me at Helen's baby shower that I should consider moving to a retirement community so I wouldn't be a burden on Kenneth's growing family. Beatrice, who forgot to invite me to William's birthday party last year. That Beatrice wanted me to have a special treat just for myself? Around 3 a.m, I got out of bed and went to the kitchen. The chocolate box sat on my counter in the moonlight, casting long shadows. It looked beautiful and expensive and completely wrong. My hand reached out to touch it, then pulled back like the box was burning hot. For the first time in my entire life, I questioned whether my family was looking out for me. For the first time, I wondered if the people I loved most in the world might not love me back. The thought was so painful, so fundamentally wrong, that I nearly convinced myself I was being paranoid, ungrateful, selfish. But I didn't open the chocolates. Some instinct deeper than thought kept my hands away from that box. I stood in my kitchen in the darkness, staring at a gift I should have been grateful for, and felt afraid. Truly, deeply afraid. I didn't know then that my fear was justified. I didn't know that inside those beautiful chocolates was enough poison to kill me 3 times over. I didn't know that my son and his mother-in-law had planned my murder with the same care most people use to plan a vacation. All I knew was that something was very, very wrong. And for once in my life, I listened to that voice inside me that said, "Don't trust this. Don't eat these. Something is wrong." That voice saved my life. The morning after my sleepless night, I made a decision that went against every instinct I'd developed over 42 years of motherhood. I was going to show up unannounced at Kenneth and Helen's house. The old Dorothy would never do that. The old Dorothy waited for invitations, respected boundaries, made herself small and convenient. But something had shifted in me during those dark hours staring at that chocolate box. I wrapped the chocolates carefully and placed them in my bag. If Beatrice wanted me to have them so badly, surely she wouldn't mind if I shared them with her daughter and grandchildren over morning tea. The thought made my stomach clench with anxiety, but I forced myself to move forward. Kenneth and Helen lived in a beautiful home, in the kind of neighborhood where the lawns looked painted on and the houses all had names instead of just numbers. Beatrice had helped with the down payment, of course. She never let us forget it. I parked across the street, gathering my courage, when I heard shouting, Helen's voice high and frantic, coming from inside the house. I could see her through the large front window, pacing back and forth with her phone pressed to her ear. Her free hand was gesturing wildly, and even from this distance I could see her face was red and blotchy from crying. I got out of my car and walked closer, not quite ready to knock, but unable to leave. That's when I heard fragments of the conversation through the window Helen had left open to let in the spring breeze. "Can't do this anymore, Mother. Those are innocent children. She doesn't deserve..." Helen's voice cracked. "I don't care what Kenneth owes. I don't care about your reputation. This is murder. Do you understand that? Murder. My legs nearly gave out. I grabbed the porch railing to steady myself. Murder. Helen said murder. The chocolate box in my bag suddenly felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Helen turned and saw me through the window. The colour drained from her face completely. For a moment, we just stared at each other, and I watched something break inside her. She dropped the phone and ran to the front door, yanking it open so hard it bounced against the wall. Dorothy. My name came out as a sob. Oh God, Dorothy, please tell me you didn't eat them. Please tell me you didn't eat those chocolates. I couldn't speak. I just shook my head. And Helen collapsed against the doorframe, crying so hard her whole body shook. I stood there, frozen, while my daughter-in-law fell apart in front of me. Come inside, she finally managed. Please, I need to tell you something. I need to tell you everything. We sat in her pristine living room, the one Beatrice had decorated with furniture too expensive to actually use. Helen's hands wouldn't stop shaking as she tried to pour tea, so I did it instead. My hands were steadier than they should have been. Maybe I was in shock. Beatrice insisted on handling your birthday gift personally, Helen began, her voice barely above a whisper. She told me it was a peace offering, that she wanted to make things right between you two. Helen laughed bitterly. I believed her because I wanted to believe her. Because it's easier to think your mother is difficult than to think she's a murderer, I finished for her. The word felt strange in my mouth. Helen nodded, tears streaming down her face. 3 days before your birthday, I came home early from taking the kids to school. Beatrice was here visiting. She didn't know I was home. I heard her talking to Kenneth in his office. The door was cracked open and I heard her say something about an insurance policy finally paying off and how you'd never see it coming. I felt cold all over. What did Kenneth say? He said, Helen covered her face with her hands. He said, are you sure it'll look natural? Dorothy, he was worried about getting caught, not about killing you. My husband was worried about getting caught murdering his own mother. The room spun. I gripped the arm of the couch, focusing on breathing, in and out, in and out. Don't fall apart. Not yet. I didn't understand then, Helen continued. I thought maybe they were talking about a movie or something. It sounds stupid now, but I couldn't imagine. I couldn't let myself imagine what they were actually planning. But then Kenneth showed up with those specific chocolates, the ones Beatrice had ordered, and the way he looked at you. She shuddered. I've never seen that expression on his face before. He looked at you like you were already dead. Why didn't you say something? I asked, and immediately regretted it. Helen flinched like I'd slapped her. I was afraid I was wrong. Afraid I was being paranoid. Afraid of what it would mean if I was right. She looked at me with desperate red-rimmed eyes. But then, last night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about you eating those chocolates and something in me just knew. I called my mother this morning and confronted her. Do you know what she said? I shook my head, not sure I wanted to know. She said, don't be dramatic, Helen. Old women die of heart attacks all the time. No one will question it. She said it like it was nothing, like your life was nothing. We sat in silence for a long moment. Then I reached into my bag and pulled out the chocolate box. Helen's eyes went wide with horror. We need to test them, I said, surprised by how calm my voice sounded. We need proof. Dorothy, I believe you without proof. We should go to the police right now. They won't believe us without evidence. A rich, respected woman like Beatrice against a nurse and her daughter-in-law. We need proof. Helen stared at me like she was seeing me for the first time. Maybe she was. Maybe I was seeing myself for the first time too. We told Kenneth we were going shopping. He barely looked up from his computer, but I caught the flash of panic in his eyes when he saw us together. Helen made some excuse about needing my advice on curtains and we left before he could ask questions. The private laboratory Helen found was expensive, but she paid without hesitation. The technician, a young woman with kind eyes, took one chocolate and promised results within 48 hours. She must have seen something in our faces because she squeezed my hand and said, "Whatever you're dealing with, I hope this helps." Those 2 days were the longest of my life. Kenneth called me 6 times the first day. 6 times asking if I'd enjoyed the chocolates yet. His voice had an edge to it, manic and desperate. "Not yet," I told him each time. "I'm saving them for a special occasion." "Mom, they'll go stale. Beatrice spent a fortune on those. She'll be insulted if you don't appreciate them properly." Appreciate them. The chocolates that were supposed to kill me. I was supposed to appreciate my own murder. The second day, Kenneth showed up at my house unannounced. I didn't answer the door. I watched him through the window as he knocked and called my name, his face twisted with barely contained panic. He tried the doorknob. He walked around to the back of the house, checking windows. When he finally left, he sat in his car for 20 minutes, just staring at my front door. That's when I knew Helen was right. That's when I knew my son was capable of killing me. The laboratory called on the evening of the second day. Helen picked me up and we drove there in silence. The technician's face was grave as she led us into her office. She didn't make us wait, didn't try to soften the blow. "Each chocolate contains approximately 200 milligrams of arsenic trioxide," she said. "A lethal dose for an adult is around 100 to 300 milligrams. Mrs. Green, if you had eaten even 2 of these chocolates, you would have experienced severe symptoms within hours. 3 or more would almost certainly have been fatal." Helen ran to the bathroom and vomited. I sat frozen in my chair, staring at the technical report that proved my son wanted me dead. Helen insisted we go straight to the police. I wanted to argue, to find some other explanation. To protect Kenneth even though he'd tried to kill me. The instinct to shield him was so deeply ingrained that even with a laboratory report in my hands, part of me wanted to make excuses for him. That's what 42 years of unconditional love does to you. It makes you defend the indefensible. But Helen was stronger than me in that moment. She drove us directly to the police station, gripping the steering wheel so tight her knuckles were white. In the passenger seat, I held the laboratory report and the remaining chocolates like they were evidence of a crime I still couldn't quite believe was real. Detective Susan Porter listened to our story without interrupting. She was a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes that missed nothing. When Helen finished talking, the detective looked at me and asked quietly, "Mrs. Green, do you believe your son tried to kill you?" The question hung in the air. I opened my mouth to say no, to defend Kenneth, to explain that there must be some mistake, but what came out instead was, "Yes, I believe my son and his mother-in-law planned to murder me for my life insurance and inheritance." Saying it out loud made it real. My hands started shaking so violently that Detective Porter took the laboratory report from me before I could drop it. "How much are we talking about?" she asked. "I have a life insurance policy worth $300,000. Kenneth is the sole beneficiary. My house is paid off and worth about $250,000. I have some retirement savings, maybe another $70,000. I heard myself listing my worth like items on a grocery receipt. This was what my life had been reduced to. Numbers on a page, a solution to Kenneth's problems. Detective Porter made several phone calls while Helen and I sat in her office. I heard fragments. Attempted murder, conspiracy, arrest warrants, search warrants. Each phrase felt like a physical blow. Within 2 hours, police officers were on their way to arrest both Kenneth and Beatrice. "Mrs. Morrison is at your son's house right now," Detective Porter told us after checking her computer. "We tracked her car through traffic cameras. She arrived about 30 minutes ago." "She's probably coaching Kenneth," Helen said bitterly. "Telling him what to say, how to act, making sure their stories match. Let her," the detective replied with a grim smile. "Sometimes criminals talk themselves into corners while they're trying to be clever." They arrested Beatrice first. Kenneth was still at his office, unaware that his carefully planned murder was falling apart. Detective Porter asked if I wanted to be present when they brought Beatrice in. Every reasonable part of me said no. But I needed to see her face. I needed to understand how someone could plan another person's death so coldly. They brought Beatrice through the station in handcuffs 2 hours later. She was still dressed immaculately, her silver hair perfectly styled, her makeup flawless. She looked like she was attending a charity luncheon, not being arrested for attempted murder. When she saw me sitting in Detective Porter's office, something flickered across her face. Not shame, not regret. Pure, undiluted hatred. Detective Porter invited Beatrice into an interrogation room. Through the one-way glass, I watched as the detective laid out the evidence, the laboratory report, the chocolates, Helen's testimony about the overheard conversation, phone records showing dozens of calls between Beatrice and Kenneth in the weeks before my birthday. Beatrice's mask of composure never cracked. She sat perfectly straight in her chair, her handcuffed hands folded on the table in front of her. "I have nothing to say without my lawyer present," she repeated calmly each time Detective Porter asked a question. But then the detective said something that finally broke through Beatrice's control. "Mrs. Morrison, we have your home computer. Our tech team is going through your search history right now. All those searches about arsenic, about symptoms of heart failure in elderly women, about life insurance policies and inheritance law. You left quite a trail." Beatrice's face went white. For just a moment, fear replaced the hatred in her eyes. Then she seemed to remember where she was and who she was supposed to be. She turned her head and looked directly at the one-way glass, as if she could see me standing there. "You were always just a placeholder," she said, her voice cold and clear. "A nurse who adopted a child she had no business raising. Kenneth deserves better than to be tied to your mediocrity forever. He deserves a life without the burden of a mother who's done nothing but hold him back. Hold him back. I'd worked myself to exhaustion for that boy. I'd given up vacations, new clothes, a decent car, a comfortable retirement. I'd given him everything I had, everything I was. And to Beatrice, I was just a burden, a problem to be eliminated." Helen grabbed my hand as we watched them lead Beatrice away. She was crying again, but I felt strangely calm. Something fundamental had shifted inside me. The fear was gone. The desperate need to be loved and accepted was gone. In its place was something I'd never felt before. Cold, focused rage. They arrested Kenneth at his office an hour later. The news stations picked up the story almost immediately. Helen and I watched from Detective Porter's office as footage played of Kenneth being led out of his building in handcuffs. His expensive suit looked rumpled, his hair was messed up. He kept looking around frantically as if searching for someone to save him. I thought I would feel something watching that. Pain, maybe. Grief. Some remnant of maternal love. But all I felt was a distant sense of justice being served. Detective Porter came back with more news. "We executed a search warrant on your son's home office, Mrs. Green. We found some interesting things. Financial records showing gambling debts totaling nearly $500,000. Credit card statements in your name that you didn't sign for. Withdrawal slips from your retirement account with forged signatures." The room tilted. "He's been stealing from me?" "For at least 2 years, based on what we've found so far. He's quite skilled at forgery. If we hadn't been looking specifically for it, we might have missed it." Helen made a sound like a wounded animal. "I didn't know. Dorothy, I swear I didn't know. I thought his business was doing well. He said we were fine. He said—" She couldn't finish. "I believe you," I told her, and I meant it. Helen was as much a victim of Kenneth and Beatrice as I was. Maybe more, because she'd married into this nightmare thinking she was building a life with someone decent. Detective Porter left us alone while she coordinated with prosecutors. Helen and I sat in silence for a long time. Finally, she spoke. "I'm filing for divorce, tomorrow. I'm taking the kids and moving out. I don't care if we have to live in a studio apartment. I won't stay married to someone who tried to murder his own mother." "Beatrice won't like that," I said quietly. Helen laughed, but there was no humour in it. "Beatrice is going to prison. I don't give a damn what she likes anymore. We left the police station near midnight. The bail hearing was scheduled for the following week. Detective Porter promised to keep me updated on everything they found. As Helen drove me home, I stared out the window at the dark streets and thought about the life I'd built, the sacrifices I'd made, the love I'd given so freely to someone who saw me as nothing but an obstacle to overcome. Kenneth had tried to reduce my existence to a dollar amount, a problem with a simple, fatal solution. But he'd made a mistake. He'd assumed I would go quietly, gratefully, stupidly to my death. He'd assumed wrong. For the first time in 42 years, I was done being grateful. I was done being understanding. I was done sacrificing myself for people who saw my love as weakness. Kenneth wanted me gone. Instead, he was about to discover exactly what he'd unleashed. The bail hearing was scheduled for 1 week after the arrests. In that week, I did something I'd never done before. I hired Frederick Whitmore, the most aggressive lawyer I could afford. He was a man in his 50s with grey hair and eyes that could cut through lies like a scalpel through tissue. He cost more per hour than I used to make in a day as a nurse, but I didn't care anymore. This wasn't about money. This was about survival. Frederick came to my house with a stack of documents 2 inches thick. He spread them across my kitchen table, and for 3 hours we went through every financial record I had. Bank statements, insurance policies, property deeds, retirement accounts. What we found made me physically sick. Kenneth had been stealing from me for 3 years, not 2. He'd forged my signature on loan applications, credit card agreements, and bank withdrawal slips. He'd taken out a line of credit against my house without my knowledge. In total, he'd stolen almost $73,000 from me. Money I'd saved working double shifts, skipping meals, driving a car held together with prayer and duct tape. "We'll file criminal charges for the financial fraud," Frederick said, making notes in his precise handwriting. "This strengthens the prosecution's case for attempted murder. It establishes a pattern of viewing you as nothing but a resource to exploit." A resource to exploit. That's what I'd been to my son, not a mother, not a person, just something to use up and discard. Frederick also helped me change my will immediately. I removed Kenneth entirely and made Helen the executor of my estate. Whatever I had would go to William and Lucy's education funds. Kenneth would get nothing, not 1 penny of the money he'd been so desperate to inherit. The bail hearing arrived too quickly. Frederick drove me to the courthouse, coaching me the entire way. "They're going to have character witnesses. Beatrice knows everyone in this city with money and influence. They'll paint her as a pillar of the community who made one terrible mistake. Don't let it shake you." The courtroom was packed. I recognized several faces from society pages, wealthy friends of Beatrice who'd come to support her. They stared at me like I was something distasteful they'd found on their shoes. I held my head high and walked to my seat beside Frederick. Kenneth and Beatrice were brought in separately. Kenneth looked terrible. His suit was wrinkled, his eyes sunken and red. When he saw me, his face crumpled. He mouthed something that looked like, "I'm sorry." But I looked away. Beatrice, on the other hand, looked as composed as ever. Prison orange somehow didn't diminish her air of superiority. Beatrice's lawyer stood first. He was an expensive man in an expensive suit, and he spoke in the smooth, practiced tones of someone used to winning. He called character witnesses, a judge, a museum curator, 2 city council members. Each one testified about Beatrice's charitable work, her contributions to the community, her sterling reputation. They made her sound like a saint who'd somehow accidentally stumbled into attempted murder. Then it was the prosecutor's turn. She was a sharp woman named Rebecca Chen who didn't waste words. She presented the laboratory report. The phone records showing 47 calls between Beatrice and Kenneth in the 3 weeks before my birthday. Text messages that made the courtroom gasp. "Your mother has lived long enough to see you succeed. It's time she rested peacefully. Beatrice had written. Kenneth's response, "How do we make sure it looks natural? I can't have suspicion on me." Beatrice's reply, "Arsenic in elderly women mimics heart failure. No one questions when old hearts give out." The courtroom erupted in whispers. Even Beatrice's society friends looked shocked. Kenneth buried his face in his hands. Beatrice stared straight ahead, her jaw tight. Then Rebecca presented evidence from Beatrice's home computer. Search histories dating back 6 months. Untraceable poisons. How to cause heart attack symptoms. Life insurance payout timeline after death. Inheritance tax law. She'd researched my murder the way someone might research a vacation destination, thoroughly, methodically. Without a shred of conscience. The prosecutor also revealed that Beatrice had a chemistry degree from her university days. She knew exactly what she was doing when she injected arsenic into those chocolates. This wasn't a crime of passion or a mistake. This was premeditated murder, planned by someone with the knowledge and resources to do it right. Kenneth's lawyer tried to paint him as a victim of Beatrice's manipulation, a desperate man drowning in gambling debts who was coerced by a stronger personality. But then Rebecca played the recording of Kenneth's police confession. His voice filled the courtroom, cold and calculated. "I asked her how long after eating them before symptoms would start. Beatrice said 4 to 6 hours. I wanted to make sure I'd be far away when it happened. I didn't want to be there when it happened." He'd planned his alibi. He'd calculated the timing of my death. This wasn't a man being manipulated. This was a man actively participating in murdering his mother. The judge asked if anyone else wished to speak before he made his ruling on bail. Frederick leaned over and whispered, "You don't have to do this." But I did. I stood up, my legs steadier than I expected, and asked to address the court. The judge looked surprised but nodded his permission. I walked to the front of the courtroom. I didn't look at Kenneth or Beatrice. I looked at the judge, at the jury of society members who'd come to support Beatrice, at the reporters scribbling notes in the back. "I adopted Kenneth when he was 6 months old," I began, my voice quiet but clear. "His birth mother was very young and couldn't care for him. I was a single nurse who'd always wanted a child. From the moment I held him, he was mine. I loved him completely." I could hear Kenneth crying behind me, but I didn't turn around. I worked double shifts for 30 years. I wore the same winter coat for 15 years because Kenneth needed new shoes, school supplies, college tuition. I never went on vacation because that money went to his school trips. I drove a car with 200,000 miles because Kenneth needed a reliable car for his internships. I gave him everything I had, everything I was. My voice grew stronger. And he repaid me by stealing from me for 3 years, by forging my signature, by viewing my life insurance policy as a solution to his problems, by asking his mother-in-law how long it would take me to die after eating poisoned chocolates. Now I did turn to look at Beatrice. She met my eyes with that same cold hatred. "Mrs. Morrison called me mediocre. She said I had no business raising Kenneth. She's right about one thing. I was too mediocre to imagine that anyone could plan another person's murder so carefully. I was too simple to recognize that my son saw me as nothing but money waiting to be collected." I turned back to the judge. "But I'm not mediocre anymore. I'm a woman who survived an attempted murder. I'm a woman who's done working herself to death for people who wanted her actually dead. And I'm a woman who will fight with everything I have to make sure they face justice for what they tried to do." The courtroom was completely silent. They planned this for months. They researched, they purchased, they delivered. The only reason I'm alive is because my daughter-in-law's maternal instinct told her something was wrong. They didn't fail because they had second thoughts or regrets. They failed because they got caught. I looked directly at Kenneth now. His face was wet with tears, his mouth moving in silent pleas. "I forgive you," I said softly. "Not for you, for me. Because I won't carry your poison in my heart the way you put it in those chocolates. But forgiveness doesn't mean I'll let you walk away from what you did. I returned to my seat. Frederick squeezed my hand briefly. The judge took less than 5 minutes to make his decision. Bail denied for both defendants. Given the severity of the charges, the premeditated nature of the crime, and the defendants' financial resources making them flight risks. They will remain in custody until trial. Kenneth broke down completely, sobbing and reaching toward me. Beatrice's face finally showed emotion, pure rage. As they led her away, she hissed at me, "You'll regret this." But she was wrong. For the first time in 42 years, I regretted nothing. The trial began 4 months later, in the middle of a sweltering summer that made the courthouse feel like an oven. I'd spent those months transforming myself in ways I never imagined possible. I sold my small house, the one I'd kept manageable for Kenneth's sake, and bought a beautiful condo overlooking the river. I started therapy twice a week, unpacking 42 years of self-sacrifice and fear of abandonment, and I began working on something that gave my pain a purpose. The letters had started arriving 2 weeks after the bail hearing, hundreds of them, from elderly women across the country who'd seen my story on the news. Women whose children had stolen from them, manipulated them, isolated them, abused them. Women who'd given everything and received cruelty in return. Their stories broke my heart and gave me strength at the same time. I read every single letter. And slowly, an idea formed. A foundation to help elderly women escape abusive family situations. Legal aid, temporary housing, therapy, financial planning. Everything I'd needed, and more. I called it Second Chapters, and I poured myself into creating it with the same energy I'd once used working double shifts for Kenneth. Helen became my partner in this. She'd filed for divorce immediately after the arrests, and moved herself and the children into a modest apartment. She refused to touch any of Beatrice's money, working 3 jobs to support her family. I helped quietly, paying for William and Lucy's therapy, their school supplies, their activities. The children were struggling with the knowledge that their father had tried to kill their grandmother, but they were resilient. Children often are. The trial itself was brutal. The prosecution called me to the stand on the second day. Rebecca Chen walked me through my entire life with Kenneth. Every sacrifice, every moment of love, every time I'd chosen his needs over my own. Then she showed the jury the forged documents, the stolen money, the insurance policy with Kenneth's calculations scribbled in the margins. "Can you tell the jury what these calculations represent?" Rebecca asked, holding up a paper found in Kenneth's desk. I looked at the numbers. My life insurance divided by the cost of his gambling debts. The value of my house minus the cost of a divorce lawyer for Helen. My retirement account balanced against interest payments to loan sharks. "Those are calculations showing how much my death was worth to him," I said clearly. He was figuring out if killing me would solve all his problems. Apparently, it would have. Kenneth's lawyer tried to break me during cross-examination. He suggested I'd been a controlling mother who'd made Kenneth feel trapped. He implied my sacrifices were actually manipulation, making Kenneth feel perpetually guilty and obligated. He painted me as someone who'd used love as a weapon. I listened to him describe me as this twisted, controlling figure, and I felt nothing but pity, because every word he spoke was actually describing Kenneth, not me. I'd given freely. Kenneth had taken ruthlessly. The lawyer could twist words all he wanted, but the jury could see the truth in the evidence. Beatrice's trial was even more damning. Detective Porter testified about finding Beatrice's research, her detailed notes, her chemistry background. They found the syringe she'd used to inject the chocolates in her home laboratory. They found receipts for the arsenic, purchased under a false name from a chemical supply company. She'd kept everything, arrogantly certain she'd never be caught. The prosecution also revealed something I hadn't known. Beatrice had done this before, not murder, but she'd poisoned her first husband 30 years ago. He'd survived, and she'd claimed it was a mistake, a mix-up with medication. He'd been too afraid to press charges. Helen testified about finding her father's journal years after his death, describing his suspicions about Beatrice's attempt to kill him. He'd lived in fear of her for 20 years until cancer finally took him. Helen's testimony was the most powerful. She described overhearing the conversation between Beatrice and Kenneth. She described the terror she'd felt watching Kenneth deliver those chocolates. She looked directly at her mother and said, "You raised me to believe that appearances mattered more than anything. That reputation and status were everything. You taught me those lessons so well that I almost let an innocent woman die rather than admit my family was monstrous." Beatrice showed no remorse throughout the entire trial. She sat perfectly straight, her face a mask of superiority even in prison clothes. When she finally took the stand in her own defense, she didn't deny the evidence. She couldn't. Instead, she tried to justify it. "Dorothy Green was holding Kenneth back," Beatrice said calmly, as if discussing the weather. "She'd raised him to feel perpetually guilty, perpetually indebted. He couldn't move forward in life with that weight around his neck. I was trying to free him." "By murdering his mother?" Rebecca asked incredulously. "By removing an obstacle," Beatrice corrected. She'd served her purpose. She'd raised him. It was time for her to step aside gracefully, but she wouldn't. She clung to him, demanded his attention, made him feel responsible for her happiness. Someone had to take action. The jury looked horrified. Even Beatrice's expensive lawyer looked like he wanted to disappear. She'd just confessed to attempted murder and called it a favor. Kenneth's testimony was pathetic in comparison. He cried through the entire thing, claiming he'd been manipulated, that he'd never really believed they'd go through with it, that he loved me and never wanted me hurt. But Rebecca destroyed him on cross-examination by playing recordings of his phone calls with Beatrice. "Mum keeps asking about the chocolates," Kenneth had said in one call. "She's not eating them. What if she gives them away? What if someone else eats them?" "Then make sure she eats them herself," Beatrice replied. "Tell her I'll be offended if she doesn't appreciate my gift. Use guilt. She responds well to guilt." Kenneth had laughed. My son had laughed at the idea of using my love against me to ensure I ate poison. The jury deliberated for 4 days. When they returned, the courtroom was packed. I sat between Frederick and Helen, holding her hand tightly. William and Lucy were with a babysitter. They didn't need to see this. "On the charge of attempted murder in the first degree, how do you find the defendant, Beatrice Morrison?" "Guilty." "On the charge of conspiracy to commit murder, how do you find the defendant, Beatrice Morrison?" "Guilty." Beatrice's face finally showed emotion, shock, disbelief. She genuinely thought her money and status would save her. "On the charge of attempted murder in the first degree, how do you find the defendant, Kenneth Green?" "Guilty." Kenneth collapsed. His lawyer caught him before he hit the floor. I watched my son fall apart and felt nothing but a distant sense of completion. Sentencing came 2 weeks later. Beatrice received 25 years without possibility of parole. She was 67 years old. She'd die in prison. Kenneth received 20 years, with the possibility of parole after 12. He'd be 54 when he became eligible for parole, if he survived that long. Before the judge dismissed the court, he allowed me to speak one final time. I stood and looked at Kenneth and Beatrice. "You tried to kill me for money. Instead, you gave me a purpose bigger than anything I'd imagined. Second Chapters has already helped 50 women escape abusive family situations. By next year, we'll help 200. Every woman we save is a testament to your failure. Every life we protect is proof that I was worth more than you ever understood." I turned to Kenneth specifically. "You were my whole world for 42 years. I would have died for you gladly. Given my life willingly if it meant you'd be happy and safe. That you planned to take it for money means I never really knew you at all. The son I loved died a long time ago. I'm just finally letting him go." Kenneth reached toward me, crying, begging. I walked past him without stopping, out of the courtroom, into the bright sunshine of a summer afternoon. Helen and Frederick followed me out. We stood on the courthouse steps, and for the first time in months, I felt light, unburdened. "What now?" Helen asked softly. "Now we live," I said. "We help others. We build something good from all this pain." 5 years passed like water flowing downriver. Second chapters grew beyond my wildest dreams. We helped over 400 women, providing legal support, safe housing, and counselling. Helen became our family services coordinator. William, now 13, volunteered teaching computer skills to elderly women. Lucy, 11, started a support group for grandchildren affected by family violence.